It's recording. Okay. First of all, I apologize for the sparkly shit that's flying across the screen. I'm trying a new webcam program, and it comes with different sparkly shit, and you get to choose which one that you want. And I can't find a way to get it just a clear screen to go away. And this is the smallest amount of sparkly that I could find amongst the choices. Okay, so I'm fixing to go into teacher mode here. Um, there are a few people, I guess, maybe a couple of thousand of us who were alive in 1980, old enough to watch the news, pay attention. We lived in either Redstone Arsenal, Alabama, or we lived right outside of Redstone in the metropolis city of Huntsville. Um, for those who don't know, that Huntsville is the heart of the NASA program. Okay. Um, so any news that had to do with science or space, a new planetary geological study, any kind of thing like that was all over the mainstream news in or around Huntsville, Alabama. Okay. In 1980, there are a few of us who are lucky enough to remember that in the mainstream news, they talked about something called what they called back then the 10th planet. Okay. There was another planet that was discovered way, way off in the distance out past Pluto. Okay. Okay. Ugh. It was in the mainstream news very briefly, and there was a panic, um, and then it was brushed under the rug. Any kind of information about it was hidden, was taken away, you know. And and then after that, the only information that you could find about the 10th planet, which later became known as Planet X, and then until about 2003, when the Sumerian tablets were finally translated. They finally broke the code and translated the Sumerian tablets. They found out that it's called Niburu, spelled Niburu. Um, but by the time that the Sumerian tablets were translated in 2003, any kind of information that you could find about Niburu was tucked away in the corners of these conspiracy websites and conspiracy newspapers and things like that. Again, because it was hidden from the mainstream. Okay. Excuse me, I got a hair in my mouth. So I've been reading a lot of the translations of the Sumerian tablets. This is easy to find. You can actually, go on eBay and buy one for a couple $100. I mean, there's so many of them. They're all written in cuneiform. It's a piece of clay that someone has taken an ancient pencil and they made marks in the clay like this, and then they fired the clay and turned it into stone. And that's actually why we have so many of these cuneiform tablets that are dated back um, 20 or 30,000 years, much more ancient than the Egyptians. And the Egyptians used papyrus, and papyrus is pretty much like paper. It burns easily, it falls apart easily. That's why we have so much fewer papyrus written documents than we have the cuneiform clay tablets. We have so many more clay tablets because they were fired and turned into stone, and they just, they lasted through the erosion. Okay. So what we know is that Niburu is actually a part of our solar system. It does not have a traditional orbit of a planet. It has more of a comet-like orbit. Very crude picture that I drew. Okay. But I will try to explain it. If the traditional planets that we were taught of in school were hidden in this little circle, sun being in the middle, right? Then we have a little circle around the sun with Mercury, and then the next one would be Venus, and then our Earth and Moon. And then Mars, and then we'd have something, the asteroid belt after Mars, and we have Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, right? Okay, and they're all in this circle. So Niburu would be in an elliptical orbit like this, okay? One orbit taking 3,600 years, 3600. And according to the Sumerian tablets, 3,600 years equals something called one shar. Okay, one shar is equal to 3,600 years. Also, the ancient Sumerians had the complete astrological chart. Did I say astrological? Astronomy, not astrology. Sorry. They had a star chart. They identified all of the 12 planets, okay? Whereas in modern technology, it took us until I think 1927 to discover the 9 that we were aware of, okay? So in the original 12, I'll try to explain that one as well. In the original 12, if that's the sun, say my fist is the sun, okay? Then we had Mercury, and then first was Mercury, second one's Venus, right? And then Mars, okay? Notice I didn't say Earth, because in the beginning of time, Earth wasn't there yet. Beginning of our planetary time, okay? After Mars, there was a planet called Tiamat. This is according to Sumerian history. Tiamat was located between Mars and Jupiter, okay? Now, on one of the rotations, when Niburu passed through the close proximity of what is called the crossing is where it comes close to where the other planets are and it shoots around the sun. That's called the crossing, okay? When Niburu came in on one of its crossings, it hit Tiamat. I mean, smack, okay? And when it crashed into Tiamat, Tiamat broke into several pieces. It broke into one gigantic chunk, okay? And then it broke into a smaller chunk, and then many, many, many very, very small pieces, okay? And then the force of the impact knocked it out of its orbit behind Mars and brought it closer and closer and closer. And then the sun and the gravity caught it again, and it ended up being the third rock from the sun. And that was the formation of Earth, okay? After a long time and a long, time and pressure, gathered all the pieces together into a spherical shape again, okay? And that's how the Earth became spherical and the moon also became spherical. They're both pieces of Tiamat, okay? But time and pressure, formed those broken pieces, because what happens in the vacuum of space is everything tightens up into a ball, whether it wants to or not, because just, the pressure of the vacuum of space is going to force it into a ball, okay? Now, again, according to Sumerian history, when Tiamat was located behind Mars before it was struck by Nibiru, it had an ice canopy on it, okay? When Tiamat was struck and it came closer to the sun, and where we are now, the ice had no option but to melt, okay? So we had this great flood on our planet. So the ancient Sumerians have, their Noah's in the Ark Bible story, okay? And the ice canopy that they talk about is the same thing in the Bible. At the very beginning of Genesis, it talks about the earth having the waters above and the waters below. Okay, the waters above would have been that ice canopy that melted. Okay. There's a lot more details. But I don't know if I can explain right now. I'm still trying to let all this sink in. It's extremely interesting to me. I've I've always I've always felt the connection to the asteroid belt. I've always known since I was a little girl that there had been a planet located where there's an asteroid belt now, you know. And I had always felt that that was, part of our history. That was where we came from. And to have that confirmation, it's pretty cool. This is not something that you would probably read about in mainstream history, geology, and science in school. They're still going to teach evolution. You know, um, I don't not believe in evolution. You know, but I think the scientific notion of what evolution is just got knocked off its axis because it's something completely else. It's not what we thought it was. And according to the Sumerian history, their knowledge of Niburu began 445,000 years ago. Okay. There have been 120 shars. Remember, a shar was 3,600 years. There's been 120 shars. That means that Niburu has come around to the crossing that we know of in written history 120 times. Okay. So the last time that it came through was about 1600 BC. And so I did some research. I wanted to find out some things that happened in 1600 BC. And I'm hoping that you can see me because I'm moving things around here. All right. Yeah, you can still see me. Okay, so according to a paper that was published in 1999, the geophysical research of the Sahara deserts, something that was written by Martin Clusani of Germany, okay, for the Institute for Climatic Impact Research, okay. He verified that there was a climate change that occurred quickly and dramatically 4,000 to 3,600 years ago. They concluded that today's desert climate in the Sahara was triggered by changes in the Earth's orbit and the tilt of the Earth's axis. The switch in North Africa's climate and vegetation was abrupt. In the Sahara, we find an abrupt decrease in vegetation from a green Sahara to a desert scrubland within a few hundred years. Okay, so what happens to Earth every time that Niburu gets close? Everything is affected by magnets, the magnetic pull of everything. So what happens when Niburu gets close is Earth's axis tilts towards Niburu in order to balance out the positive and the negative magnetic balance. Okay. It says also in 1600 BC, an unknown civilization with an alphabet that as of 2003 was yet to be deciphered. Okay. This is when this was written, was 2003. Suddenly appeared in the Indus Valley, which is now what we call West Pakistan. In the 29th year of King She, the last ruler of Asia, the earliest recorded Chinese dynasty, in his 29th year of reign, the sun was dimmed, which means there was an object in our sky that was blocking out our sun. Okay. King She, this is what's written. This is lacked virtue. The sun was distressed. During the last years of She, ice formed in the summer mornings and frosts in the 6th month, which was July. Heavy rainfall toppled temples and buildings. Heaven gave severe orders. The sun and the moon were untimely. which means that the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, rising of the moon, were not matching up with what was expected, like according to a chart. Hot and cold weather arrived in disorder, and the 5 cereal crops withered and died. And that was written during the reign of Emperor Kiri, about 1600 BC. Also, around 1600 BC, a civilization arose on the banks of the Huanghe River in north central China. And in other words, suddenly there was a population of people that hadn't been there before. Okay. Also, the first dynasty of Babylon ended in 1600 BC. Okay. In the Semitic culture, Ikosos was deposed in 1600 BC, and the Jewish exodus led by Moses happened shortly thereafter. Okay, so 1600 BC, hello, was the time of Genesis. It was the time of Moses. Okay. This featured a river Nile filled with blood and water they could not drink. Okay. The Cycladic settlement on the island of Thera was destroyed by a great volcanic eruption about 1600 BC. Hittite eternal strife caused great disorder and ended in 1600 BC with King Telepini. China gave birth to one of the earliest civilizations, about the dates from 3,600 years ago. Pottery pieces found in Fiji suggest the islands were settled in the west from Melanesia 3,600 years ago. Okay, there's goes on and on and on. A study by Claude Jones of the Great Lakes in America showed that these lakes have only existed for 3,600 years. Okay, in other words, these Great Lakes were formed by one of the times, by the last passage of Niburu when it came around and tilted the earth, and it caused such geographical changes to go on. Radiocarbon analysis indicates that plants associated with the mastodons, were the giant mammoths, I guess the plants that they ate, were 3,600 years old. Similar conclusions concerning the late survival of the Pleistocene fauna were drawn by various field workers in many parts of the American continent. From observations on beaches throughout the world, somebody named Dowley concluded that there was a change in the ocean level, which dropped 16 to 20 feet 3,600 years ago. Okay, so there's that. I'm trying to find out where I put my video here because it disappeared. Okay, there it is. Okay, now Atlantis. We know the story of Atlantis. It was the city that was supposedly consumed by the ocean. Okay. The story of Atlantis would make perfect sense if when Tiamat was parked between Mars and Jupiter, okay, and we had a civilization there, okay, and then that planet was knocked by Niburu, knocked out of its orbit, everything, all forms of life on that planet would have had to have been destroyed, you know. And then, it resettling to where it is now, third rock from the sun. It would make total sense. And then after it got here, all this ice canopy fell, water, and flooding everything. That would explain for a city being consumed by the ocean, And I wouldn't know if we would ever find remnants of it. But according to the Sumerian tablets, and here's the thing that gets me. According to those Sumerian tablets, when we had our ice age, we had the Neanderthals and the Homo erectus. And then before that, the dinosaurs, going way, way, way back, okay? Which, we have all this evidence of, because we have the bones. We have, the fossils and the bones of all the life that was going on during that time. And we also know that at that time, the geo formations, we had something called, was, I want to say Pandaria, but that's not it, but Pangea. We had Pangea, okay? But when we had all of that, we were actually Tiamat in the location between Mars and Jupiter. That kind of fucks with me, because I think it's just because of the idea of us surviving that far away from the sun. I think that's what gets me. But then now we also know now that the giant mountain formations that we have on Earth, not all of them, some of them were formed when plates came together and pushed the ground up, okay? But there are some, what we think of as mountainous formations, excuse me, mountainous formations that are actually the fossil remains, the petrified remains of the bases of tree trunks, okay? Incredibly large, tall, wide trees, okay? It's kind of hard to fathom a tree being that big, but think about it this way. When we were Tiamat was at least twice the size of Earth. It was a humongous planet. Earth, as we know it, is a remnant. It's a piece of Tiamat. Tiamat was like, if this was Earth, Tiamat had to be this big around, at least. Because if you were to take the moon and the Earth and all of the pieces that are in the asteroid belt and to mass them all together, I mean, they had to have been the size of Jupiter or Mars. I mean, it's because Jupiter or Saturn. But that when we were Tiamat, the Sumerians, wrote down in their history that we had these much larger life forms. We had much larger, the dinosaurs, of course, were very large, and these trees were extremely large. And that, the air pressure would have had to have been much different to support life that far away from the sun, even with an ice canopy. We would have had a different barometric pressure, and that different barometric pressure would support this life that we could not possibly have on Earth right now. Okay. Now, another thing interesting about the incoming of Niburu is that it's not only affecting the axis of Earth, it's not only affecting the climate change on Earth, it's affecting the climate change on every single planet in the solar system. Okay. This is something that NASA has been researching for at least the last 5 years. It was the main reason that they sent the probe to Pluto, because they wanting to get the geological information of each planet as it passes by. And they're finding out that, that there's temperature changes on each planet that show climate change. It shows us, this global warming on every planet in our solar system. The closer that Niburu gets, it's affecting the ecosystem of every planet. Okay. I mean, that doesn't change the fact that, yeah, we are screwing up our planet with, like the carbon monoxide and, by being wasteful human beings. I mean, that doesn't change that fact. Okay. But it's what we're doing to the planet is not the entire problem. Part of the quote unquote problem is our planet's reaction to, it's having to magnetically change and tilt, okay, to make up for, to make that balance, because here comes a positive force. You can't have two positives, they're going to repel, okay? And so it has to have some negative force to balance it out, okay? I think what else? And so, I can't remember what I did explain that this, like again, like if our solar system rotated this way, right? Then this elliptical orbit that Nibiru takes is actually this way, diving in like that. And another interesting fact, now this is something that I actually learned when I was in astronomy class in college. We were studying the expansion of the universe. Our universe is expanding, okay? A little bit, every year it expands a little bit. Now, in order for it to expand, period, it has to be in motion. So that means that not only are we not only are we moving at 17,000 miles an hour around the sun like this, but we're also the entire solar system is moving like this. So the entire solar system is moving, all right? And then we have the incoming of the Nibiru. So it's all really cool. It's exciting to me. And I'm excited over the idea that very, very soon, everyone is going to know what I know, you know? And it's not scary. I mean, we have to be prepared for, there's probably going to be a lot of religious zealots who will use this information to inflict fear on people. NASA already knows that Nibiru is not going to hit us, but we will see it in the atmosphere. I believe there's also video clips out there where Niburu has been caught. If we look around sunset in the western sky, it shows up behind the sun. You can probably mistake it for Mars because Mars shows up around sunset. Of course, Mars is a teeny tiny, pinpoint red dot, and this thing shows up, about that big. If you could compare it to a pinpoint being Mars, this thing shows up as a small moon, um, and it shows up almost directly behind the sun, and then and you can double check yourself. Always question it yourself to make sure that it's not the moon. Look in the sky for the moon. If you can find the moon and then you can find this other small object, then it's not the moon. Um, I do not know the speed in which it's going. I don't think there's any way to predict what exact day that it would show up so prevalent in our atmosphere to be able to see it unmistakably. But according to the Sumerian tablets, whenever it does get close enough to be seen like that and block out the sun, that the occupant, the inhabitants of Niburu come to this planet and they start getting resources. You know, um, that's it. I'm sitting here eating pizza. Like I said, my mother's gone. Yay! I got the place to myself for a couple of days. um, I really wish that I could have spoken about this. I wish I could have had a discussion and a conversation with like-minded people. Um, but I just don't know anybody that wants to get into all this. I know Adam would have loved it, but hey, that's that. But let me see if this recorded. Hopefully it did. And if it did, I'll post it. And I'm going to try my best to find out a way to get rid of this sparkly crap. Y'all have a good day.